So we just had a wrap up at the main stage. So we see people kind of slowly coming in. So as we are starting this conversation, I couldn't. I mean, it was kind of a thing for me to really start having the chats or the panels about something that's really, really important to me, which is privacy and ethics, and kind of this feeling that I've been having on my back for the last couple of years that somebody's tracking me. Is it just me? Is it just me? So that I kind of realized all of a sudden I'm speaking with somebody on a phone and I'm mentioning, I don't know, pasta, and all of a sudden I'm getting all kind of pasta advertising happening. So I'm wondering, what do you think, Heather and Trine? And by the way, I'm really, really privileged and very happy to have Trine and Heather with us today, because if I don't know if I have any questions about ethics or privacy or anything of the kind, they're kind of my number one direction to go to. So I'm curious, from your perspective, do you see things changing? Do you see that privacy is a thing now, or is it still, kind of, yeah, we know that we're being tracked, but, what do you think? Trine, would you like to start, or Heather?
I mean, think of how we would have had this conversation at this time last year, as opposed to now. And all of the issues we were dealing with last year are still absolutely valid. But as Trine and I were just babbling together, but while you were all in the main stage session, it's now the issues of our health, our public welfare, our children's education, safety, all of these things wrapped up on top of the issues we haven't dealt with already. That's not to say they're insurmountable, Vitaly, but what they are, and I talk about this in the book, is they're real now. They're not concepts happening to other people. They're things which impact not just how we buy things, but how we can live our lives, and indeed, if we can live our lives in the ways we'd like to. And we can't save the world or deal with all the issues in it, but what we can do is make people aware of what they need to think about in terms of the ethics, in terms of the design, in terms of the law, in terms of public order and safety, and empower people to raise their hand and say, no, I don't think that's right.
Okay. So Trine, how do you see things changing as well on your end? I believe you wrote a book about the topic.
I did. Heather actually has it right front and center, Ethical Design Handbook. We were just talking about when not to launch a book, when not to release a book, which would be the day before a country goes into lockdown, and the week before a continent goes into pandemic lockdown. We don't want to do that. But it is what it is. It's still an important book. It doesn't take away from the message. I think what I've seen over the past months is to a very great extent a digital acceleration. So a lot of companies and a lot of people have slowly, up until the point of March, adapted to digitalization and stuff like that. But then everyone was sent home, and we were all forced into a digital transformation, and it was accelerated by the fact that everyone was remote all of a sudden. I think that has done a lot of good for the privacy discussion, because one thing that everyone all of a sudden had to think about and consider was contact tracing apps. They came about very, very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, because I think up until that point, the privacy discussion to many people who weren't part of the digital industry saw the privacy discussion as abstract, as to an extent irrelevant. And if there are two things that the whole notion of the contact tracing app has established with people who don't work in the digital industry, is relevance to their own lives, and also a level of concreteness to the discussion. And I think that's been extremely helpful, because all of a sudden you have, your average Joe on the street having an opinion on their digital privacy, because now they have been asked to download an app that is tracking their, whereabouts, and they're not entirely sure that they feel right about that. It's a very important step towards establishing ownership of privacy and establishing this notion of relevance. I think it'll help us moving forward, and the discussion has changed in that direction.
Yeah, it's very interesting for me to see just kind of some sort of a slightly different perception of privacy. I think like this has been kind of very noticeable for some reason. Just because in the past it was more like a couple of people who really care about the privacy, and they really they go and install the Tor client and all the things, and all of a sudden it's kind of becoming a public thing, which really involves everyone. In many ways, like this lockdown situation involves everyone. It kind of really, there is no person on the planet, I think, that is not in some way familiar with what's happening. And so it's really kind of surprising to me, because I had very similar thoughts. And actually, dear friends joining us, it's not just us having conversation. Sometimes I just go very deep in my thoughts and stuff. If you have conversations, feel free. If you have questions, feel free to add them in the chat as well. We'll bring them up. But it was so weird for me to see that all of a sudden this thing that happened brought a little bit more towards privacy or discussions about privacy than GDPR and CCPA combined. Is it a weird thing, or is it just me? Or do you see it differently?
I don't think it's weird at all, because privacy is now something that's conditional and leading to everything else. And it's raised a whole host of ethics issues, and we could just go in any direction, but we'll think about contact tracing apps. If your country is making one, is it mandatory? Do you have to have it on your phone? Do you have to have it activated at all times? Is it centralized or is it decentralized? And is the information on it conditional to anything else? Like I have been seeing countries where you have to have the app, no choice. Mm-hmm. And in less democratic societies, what does that mean? No app, no vote. No app, no welfare benefits. No app, no public services. And then that's before you even have the illness. So what happens to you if it flashes up positive? What else is that data being linked to? So it's this very scary situation where privacy and UX and design are now linked to, in very scary ways, to what we may or may not be able to do in our own homes, in public, as citizens. And again, that's not to say these issues can't be surmounted, but we need to think about these issues from the start, rather than, as has certainly happened here in the UK, the focus is, let's make an app. It'll be shiny. Let's put it on everyone's phones. And us data ethics and privacy cranks are in the background screaming, what about the data protection impact assessment? What about the law? Who are you sending this data to? Right. And of course, in the UK, the solution to that was disband the data ethics board.
Yes.
But at least they tried.
Yes.
Yeah, and then in Denmark, we've done we already have an app. We've had an app for months. And our data ethics council was involved from the day zero. I think it's a good indicator as to the priority of the government, and but we really have to be very mindful, because the decisions made today, and in our contact tracing apps, and also just in products in general, the decisions we make today have a huge impact on people's lives in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, because the data that we collect or don't collect doesn't just go away unless we specifically design the system to make it go away.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I think really needs to be built into the process, the design process of systems and products. Mm-hmm. Privacy can't just be slapped on top afterwards, like an afterthought. Just as you can't slap on usability as an afterthought. Right. But there tends to be this notion that privacy. I think a lot of designers and developers and product people, business people, have a hard time discussing privacy, because it feels kind of dangerous, right? we're pro privacy, but what does that mean? What does that translate into? And they don't know how to do that translation because they don't have the tools to do so. They don't have a governance model that instigates and it translates what privacy means to their product development process. And that's a problem. And that's where we need to start.
Right.
We want to make, actual change the process.
Right. So maybe to follow up on this, Trine, because I know that you mentioned a couple of things about this in the book. So once you have a situation where you want to kind of advocate for privacy in your design process, in your development process, pretty much everywhere, right? We probably all agree that we need to start, considering privacy aspects as we're starting designing and starting doing research, and even earlier than that. But how do you make a convincing argument to your boss, to your managers, that privacy is important? Just by mentioning the lawsuits, or how would you approach it?
Well, you could do that. They sure are scary. They're also maybe they don't feel super relevant to smaller companies who are not dealing with social networks and billions of users. And I think that's a valid argument that, it only happens to Google and Facebook, etc., the really big ones. The lawsuits don't really impact. We don't really see a lot of lawsuits with very smaller companies to the same extent. So it's a valid argument that it happens to the big ones, not to the small ones. As far as the short history of GDPR is concerned. However, we don't know what direction GDPR legislation or enforcement, what direction that will take. So I think it's a dangerous argument to lean on, to say, well, we won't get into lawsuits, so why should we concern ourselves with it? I think it's a matter of saying, I know it's a matter of saying that we need to think 2 steps ahead. So when you do other types of planning, you don't just plan for the next day, right? You plan ahead, you plan years ahead, or you plan months ahead. And it's the same with integrating privacy. Even if you don't think that it matters that much today, you don't really know the future of this. Well, I have an idea. And we've seen acceleration in just, the sheer attention on privacy and ethics. So I have an idea where we're kind of heading, but it's also a matter of maybe looking at the brand aspect. So do you want to strengthen your brand as a privacy first brand, or do you want to just stay in the pool of, kind of gray area brands that don't really do super bad things, but they don't really do super good things either? I think we're missing the point when we're not discussing ethics and privacy as a brand messaging tool. If we look at the pure business and take away some of the emotions that we tend to have when these types of discussions tend to be quite emotional, but they don't have to be, because you can see this as a pure business decision. And look at the brand value of adding privacy to your process. So,
like looking at the design things, we can try design, UX, business. We can kind of try to look into the branding. We can also trying to just implement and design and build with privacy in mind, because it's probably going to be cheaper than having to deal with all this stuff later. But then on the other hand, coming to Heather now, from a legislative perspective, from GDPR perspective, from CCPA perspective. I would love to, because I know that we have many attendees coming from the US, and obviously in Europe, we have slightly different regulation here when it comes to data protection and cookies and all that. So how do you see things changing now? Now we have GDPR. Would you say that it was effective? And also, as a follow-up to that, we have CCPA. Would you say that this is the right step as well? And what is happening in general there?
So now that GDPR is beginning to be stress tested, we're beginning to see how robust and resilient it is. And interestingly enough, that's not coming in the context of where we thought it would be, which is things like social media and ad tech, where it is certainly making an impact there. But COVID is where the GDPR rubber is hitting the rails in terms of things like the data protection impact assessment on your COVID tracing app. Now, I would have said to any audience at any time, if a regulator asks you, can I see your data protection impact assessment? And your answer is, what's a data protection impact assessment? You then have 2 problems. So it's actually giving us a really robust framework with which to structure, measure, and constrain data protection and privacy in the COVID context, whether that's healthcare, whether that's contract tracing, whether that's education. You know, everyone's kids were going home and doing their schoolwork from home for a couple of months on school issued Chromebooks. Well, are you aware that a lot of those Chromebooks and school issued laptops, the webcam is automatically activated and is taking pictures of your kid every 30 seconds and is sending it to the school? Why is that? Well, it's for safeguarding purposes. But who's looking at that? Is that necessary and proportionate now that it's taking a picture of you in your kitchen? And where is that information being sent? America, which doesn't have privacy law. So GDPR is actually providing really good guardrails, not to stop innovation or stop healthcare, or certainly not to tamp down the best efforts we're all doing in this global health emergency. It's providing the exact set of guardrails it was meant to provide. So we cross the pond and we have CCPA, which is a much narrower piece of legislation. It only pertains to certain kind of businesses with customers in California. It is not a universal privacy law such as GDPR is. And the key, and I talk about this a lot in my book, is the word consumer. California consumer privacy legislation. It quantifies the privacy rights you do have as a function of a consumer transaction, such as you have an account with a service. GDPR is a human rights-based law. CCPA is a transactional law. You see, do you understand the difference there? Yeah. Because privacy is a human right in Europe, it is not a human right in the US. The thing we, I think there's a B there. The thing we have to all look forward to now is the inevitability of some form of federal level privacy legislation in the US. Because what you have is, the phrase is patchwork for describing privacy law in the US, but I hate the term patchwork because there's no such thing as a patchwork with holes in it. There are sectoral laws, such as in healthcare and higher education. There are state laws, such as in California, Vermont. But if you don't have anything particular to that situation, you're on your own. So what happens is over here in Europe, and as Trine will tell you, God knows we're not getting it all right and we're making a lot of mistakes. But at least in everything we've been doing, whether that's related to apps and contact tracing or education, or just in the ways our health system manages the pandemic, we have the guardrails and we have that set of instructions. Whereas if you're an American developer, you don't have any guardrails, you don't have any guidance, you don't have any support, you are making it up as you go along. Now times that by 50 states. I was very active there were plans here in the UK for a draft coronavirus safeguards bill to provide a human rights basis in legislation to accompany any COVID tracing apps. And one of the guardrails you have to put in is, you know, for America, which is a problem we don't have here, is make sure your health systems know about the app. Now here, any COVID tracing app would be developed in cooperation with the National Health Service or whatever, in addition to having GDPR. In America, you have neither a centralized health system nor a centralized privacy law. So all those years that the United States has been delaying and stalling and making excuses about not having a federal level privacy legislation, this is where it's really starting to hurt.
Right.
And that you don't have the safeguards, you don't have the constraints, you don't have the support, and it's anything goes. And this is no time for any of us to have to make it up as we go along.
Right. So how would you see this then changing now? So is a developer or designer working in the US? You know, you have to respect GDPR because you probably will have some customers coming from Europe. And at the same time, you have to probably respect some laws coming in the US. How do you even keep track on that? I mean,
so what I talk about is, I certainly talk about in the book, is the safeguards that your users have over their privacy should never be contingent on the presence or the absence of legislation. If someone doesn't have a privacy law, such as anyone living in the US, why should that disadvantage them? So the key has to be developing to a certain set of guidelines, standards, being aware of. And that doesn't necessarily mean chapter and verse, paragraph, Article 22, paragraph 3 of GDPR. It means data minimization. Collect as little as you need, collect it granularly, and we could go on for hours about this. But it's about holding yourself accountable to some sort of set of guardrails, whether that's legislative or not, so that you're developing to best practice. You're designing to best practice that even if you don't have anyone to safeguard you, at least you're not completely pulling it out of the air, making it up as you go along. And what you'll find is, and here's this thing about GDPR. If you were developing responsibly to begin with, very little of it would have been new to you. If you developed to GDPR, only about 20% of CCPA would have been new to you. The big leaps come into people who've just, let's just throw an SPI, an APK in there. This is a shiny button and it's sending everything to Facebook.
Yeah.
It's been in things such as, we're just going to enable location data all the time because. So if you follow best practice responsible principles, even if you don't have any sort of privacy law, much less a local, state, federal, sectoral one, you're doing the absolute best by your users.
Right, and you should be protected then by whatever law comes along and whatever users from connections are coming along. One question that I hear quite a lot though is, so if I'm designing for, again, American audience primarily, but I do have some European audience, European customers as well. So if my app or my website actually is violating GDPR, right? And I know of that, it's just maybe too expensive or whatever to fix it. What could be the worst thing that can happen to me if I'm an American company? Can I be blocked in Europe, or do we know what would happen? Would it be a fine?
So your European user would file a complaint through their National Data Protection Authority, which we all have here. There's one in Denmark, which is producing some really good English material. In Germany, they're by the Länder, the federal states. Here we have the ICO. And the regulator will engage with that company. And the first thing they're going to say is, if you're an American company, were you enrolled in the Privacy Shield scheme? Now that has temporarily been suspended owing to the Schrems II judgment. However, if you were in it to begin with, that judgment shouldn't have any bearing on your data flow processes. And at that point, if all of this is a whole new language to you, you're going to have issues, because it then becomes a matter of the data protection regulator liaising with the US Department of Commerce, who will then step in. But that being said, it should never, ever be a matter of do this or we'll get sued, or what jurisdiction does Europe have over me? It's about, are you protecting your users' privacy? Because if you're not protecting your European users' privacy, you're not going to be protecting your American users' privacy as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, the European regulator absolutely can step in and liaise with the Department of Commerce in the US to ensure that those rectifications happen. Now, as I've always said, anything you hear about fines is BS. Like, I actually lose any respect for anyone who talks about GDPR and privacy law in the context of, oh my God, 4% of your global billions of fines. Bullshit. Sorry about my language. Fines are only ever the fourth and final stage. And that's if you're doing something really horrible, really horrendous, or you're Facebook basically. A data protection regulator in Europe will work with you constructively and proactively to help you fix the problems. Where the legislative processes kick in is if you're refusing, if you're being difficult, if you say you fixed it and then you screw it up later, or if there's something you've been doing that's been really, 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 really horrible concerning people's what are called risk to life and limb, that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. Okay.
You are not going to have some Euro regulator throwing a fine at you and shutting down your company. That is not how it works. And it's not about avoiding fines or avoiding prosecution, which is not how it works, by the way. It's civil law. It's not criminal. It's not courtrooms and gavels. It's about getting the support you need to protect your users' privacy.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting to know. Trine, on your end, now that we know that one way or the other, the privacy law is, is coming, and there are more and more, governments that actually push for legislation anyway. It's now up to designers and managers and companies to really figure out a way to make it a default, kind of find a way to make it a part of the process of the workflow. From your experience, and maybe this will be one of the last questions, just because we have something happening on stage right now. Not fireworks. Somebody texted me fireworks. No fireworks on the main stage. But I'm curious, from your experience, what would be a nice, smooth, simple, I would say successful approach to start embedding privacy decisions in a design workflow, in a design process, or also in the development process?
So I think, as with any change, it's a good idea to start, to experiment and start small. We're not talking about the end goal here. We're talking about how do we take the first baby steps towards implementing some of these changes that we know we need to scale up. So what I would do is I would pick a project that that's isolated. I would pick a team that has that takes ownership of this problem, that acknowledges that this needs to be done, and who are ready to do it. It also requires a level of readiness to start experimenting with these things, because I think we need to stop talking about implementing privacy, ethics, usability, what have you, as an additional cost. It doesn't have to be an additional cost if you think it into the process from the get-go. Then it becomes part of the process.
Absolutely.
And you'll have, lots of ambitious teams and people who are ready to take on that challenge and say, give me the budget, give me the same budget that I usually have, give me the same time frame, just give me free hands, maybe give me a consultant that can help me with the very specifics of GDPR or whatever, the external sort of expert tiny bit of help they need, and let me run with it. I'll prove to you that I can stay within budget, I can stay within time, and I'll make this happen. We have to I think we need to change the conversation from, okay, all these things are extra costs, so per default we can't make it happen, to, okay, if we think it in from the get-go, it doesn't have to be an additional cost.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Oh, this makes me very kind of, empowered. And this is very fitting, because I think that Trine, your official bio is also about empowering ethical design considerations. So this is, I feel very empowered.
Empowerment.
Yes. So on that one, maybe the final note before we depart here. So do tell me, does the future look bright for privacy?
I think it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And it's tragic that it's taken the pandemic to bring so many of those issues front and center. But we have to look at this as an opportunity to do better from the start and look after each other, not as data strings, but as human beings.
Okay. Trine?
I totally agree. I think that what we're seeing now is that the privacy issues and deep problems that exist in our digital society and in society is being attacked on several fronts. We used to attack it, primarily on one front. Then we got GDPR and we got legislation in the US. Now we're also starting to see this whole acceleration of awareness in the general public. So we're starting to attack this problem on multiple fronts. And that is going to make an impact, because at some point it'll start moving to try to put some type of metaphor on it. Right. I have hopes for the future.
Yes. So with that in mind, I'm very, very hopeful that we are moving towards, I think that everybody can only benefit from that. With this in mind, I would like to kindly thank you, Heather, Tech Policy and Regulation.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. It was so good to do this.
Thank you so much for joining as well. And Trine, who is researcher consultant, because I forgot to introduce you in the beginning. Look at me. and it's horrible.
Just buy my book, then I'll be happy.
But Trine and Heather have one thing in common, and that's more than you think, because both of them are also writing books. And in fact, Trine has published hers with yours truly, Smashing, in March this year, just when the wonderful pandemic came in. And you can get it now as well. And Heather is writing one, and we'll be finishing.
So we're any editing, and I would highly discourage any of you from ever writing a book on privacy in the middle of a pandemic.
Okay, well, I don't think that, I hope this is not going to be a very common use case for most of the
Exactly.
All right, so thanks everyone for joining in. I think that the next session has started already on the main stage. It's Nadeep Bremer speaking on data visualization. So hop in. Oh, good, I did that. Hop over and hop. And I'll see you there in a bit. Thank you so much, Trine and Heather. And please, if you are joining us and you liked it, please just write a little clap before you leave. That would be nice.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. It was wonderful to see you both again. Miss you.
And we will do this at a cafe with a glass of wine sometime.
We will at some point.
We will.
All right.
We will.
Thank you so much.
We'll never leave the cafe once we get there.
No.
It's like, no.
And see you next time.